welcome to episode number 2 on the Dayton and Troy. Hopefully you guys enjoyed episode 1 and you're back for more. This one we're going to dive a little bit more into the meat and the bones, I guess you can call it, of the first segment of this build in terms of detailing and structures and actual that kind of stuff. First we're going to start with the catenary here, and as I had said, this part was just a real nightmare once I started to try to angle it around some of these bends and stuff like that. But I'll talk more about that as we get kind of more into it. The first thing I'm doing here is starting to lay out some of the sidewalks of this downtown scene here. Obviously, this is supposed to be a downtown kind of area. I wanted to outline the tracks and the roadways with sidewalks, and that would allow me sort of a platform to put people on and other details and park some cars and do some stuff like that. And what I'm trying to do with laying this out is leave enough space on either side of the track, for the most part, in most areas, so that traffic can get around these train cars. I don't think the roads were so narrow that cars had to like get out of the way totally. I think there might have been like a main through kind of lane, sort of. I could be completely wrong about that, but just judging by some of the photos that I saw, it looks like there's at least a little bit of a space there. So I was making sure I could leave a little bit of space so I could park some cars and still have the train cars go around them. Obviously, the first problem that I'm running into with this, or the first thing that I needed to address, is the angle of these the curbs and the corners. So in like a normal downtown scene, you'd have kind of a grid system, and here that's just not gonna work too well because the sidewalks kind of cut into the track. And I know if this was real life, they would probably just maybe run the track through the sidewalk. I've definitely seen that done down in downtown Brooklyn and that sort of thing, but I think the problem here, and the reason I try to avoid that, is the way that the sidewalks are and the height of the sidewalk versus the height of the rails and the type of rails that I'm using here. So since I'm using these sort of street running tracks, I have to put them at a certain level so that they actually look like they sit flat on the road. And when you go to that height and you try to run that same rail through something like a sidewalk, then it ends up completely buried. And then if you lower the sidewalk to be the proper height, you don't have enough of a curb for the sidewalk. So I was just trying to avoid it altogether and not mess with it. And here, man, this is just bringing back bad memories. I shot this, I did the video part of this probably about a month ago, since the time that I'm doing this voiceover, which is really weird because you're not gonna see this video for another long time. Anyway, so this catenary work and these corners and stuff like that was a nightmare. Even along the roads, I'll point out that the double track catenary, the poles are in the roads, and although I would think that in real life they would probably try to stretch them and put them onto the sidewalk so they're not in the road, at the same time I lived in Brooklyn where we have a lot of elevated train cars, like the Brooklyn, the L train, and I think the J, I'm trying to remember now, it's been a long time. The trains going through like the Brooklyn Queens kind of border are elevated down the main roads, and the supports for these tracks are like right in the middle of the parking lane. So they do kind of like, this is kind of like a real life thing, a real life problem, right? So I figured, you know what, I've seen examples of it in real life, not with catenary, but with actual bridge structures. So I'm gonna use that to my advantage as an excuse to make the roads nice and wide so that I have a parking lane, and also put catenary posts in the middle of the road. And now, I guess while I'm at it about the roads, while I'm talking about it, I didn't want to use regular roads here. I didn't use road splines. And one reason is because I just wanted to have control over the roads, right? I wanted to be able to make the roads as wide or as narrow as I wanted to. But secondly, I also don't want traffic actually driving on these roads because they're not going to get out of the way. The cars are not going to get out of the way of the train cars, right? You're going to have all kinds of clipping and stuff like that. So I decided to just use the Tume or Tumi, whatever, the road texture that I pretty much use exclusively all over the place, along with that really nice cobblestone texture. Actually, it's not really nice. If you look at it up close, it looks pretty bad, but from far away, it serves its purpose. The cobblestone texture that I used for one of my build challenge videos. And I figured I'd put that down, put the textures down, and then that'll give me the effect for the road that I want, as well as being able to park cars. And if I want to have some traffic on there, I could probably add some invisible roads and stuff like that and actually direct the traffic where I want it, but probably not going to do that. Now, here is a problem. The original track plan calls for this sort of like elevated track going through the middle of town, and I was trying to keep with this original track plan. And I really fought with this one, and I tried really hard, and I think my solution, I ended up just doing it off of camera, and I just moved the track out of frame, but and I think I just did that off camera, but this is just me fighting with this and trying to make it work. I like the idea of like how it could look, and I was picturing my build challenge. I can't remember the name of it. Was it the Mid-Atlantic and Western? I was picturing how that bridge kind of comes through between the two buildings, and I was like, oh wow, this is kind of like the same sort of scene. I could actually have fun with this. But the problem is that this city block is so small and so short, and there's all this catenary underneath this bridge. There is just no way to actually get this to look right with the assets that I have and the assets that I was able to find. So I fought with it for a while. I tried a bunch of different things. I tried just putting these support walls underneath and just totally faking, some kind of like an elevated causeway. I don't know, whatever you would call it. That didn't work. I tried using like upgraded subway tracks, for elevated subway tracks. That didn't work. And then that was it. That was the cut. I cut the camera, I pulled my hair out, and then I was like, I'm just gonna move this out of the way because it doesn't actually serve any purpose other than aesthetics, I guess, and those aesthetics really aren't that great. So I just moved it out of the way, and it's gonna go like behind the backdrop, and then that's that. Not a big deal. Problem solved. And now I get some more space to do some cool downtown buildings. So here I'm using the jointed rail downtown structures, the downtown buildings, which are really cool. I like them a lot. They definitely fit the aesthetic here, the downtown feel, and that sort of old-timey feel with the 19th century, like 1900s, turn of the century kind of architecture and like really basic brick structures and stuff like that. So I like the way that they look. They fit in pretty nicely, and I certainly use them quite a lot through this build in a lot of different places. I try to mix it up a little tiny bit because I obviously don't want to be using the same assets over and over and over again, because it does eventually become kind of repetitive looking, especially with some of the industry assets. So I do try to clip them together and make like kind of new looking structures with them. But there's only so much you can do in such a small space, in this sort of model railroad style space. So it gets a little bit tricky to get it all to fit. I guess the benefit is that you can kind of clip things together and clip them into the background and stuff like that without having to worry too much about how that's going to look on an adjacent side, because you're just not ever going to see it. Which also leads me to another point that I'd like to make about these model railroad builds that I really like, is that they're small, they're compact, and I can focus on detailing the real trackside elements and stuff like that. I don't have to worry about all these background scenes and stuff like that. And I had mentioned in episode 1 that one of my goals here was to do a little bit more of like detail scenes. So I do some of that during the builds. You'll see me do some of the detailed stuff, and then I'm also going to do like a final pass at the end of the whole series. The last episode or second to last episode or something like that will be like a final detail pass. So I'll go over and just add some extra scenes, fill in some gaps and stuff like that, just put more people down and stuff like that. So that's my goal with that. So now at this point, I am working on this is supposed to be a freight house, I believe, here. And one of the interesting things about these interurban style railroads is that they would just drop cars off a lot of times, like right in the middle of the road. So you'll see, and you probably saw it in the intro, that there's some shots of box cars just kind of spotted right on the road, like right in the middle of the road. They would do pretty much anything to deliver freight to a customer, and if it meant just leaving a car in the middle of the road, they would do it. And I think it's important to remember that in this time period, there wasn't really a whole lot of vehicular traffic on the roads. So you're not talking about like all kinds of congestion and stuff like that, and cars, having to go around, box cars that are spotted there. There was not really a whole lot of cars driving around to begin with. So that wasn't really too problematic. But talking about modification of tracks, I did have to modify the track arrangement here. I kept the general gist of it with the double track. I think there was 3 tracks in the original track plan that were supposed to be in here. I got rid of one of them. So I tried to keep the same idea, but just having that 3rd track in there made the junctions way too tight. And even now, they are really tight, but they, I think, are acceptable enough that we can kind of just turn a blind eye to the really bad stuff. And it's also worth noting that when they would deliver freight on some of these really, really nasty type bends, they would use like a spacer bar or spacer drawbar or something like that between some of the freight cars to actually prevent them from clipping into each other like in real life. Unfortunately, I don't think that there's something like that exists in this game. However, we can kind of pretend if there's, you know, like a gap between some of these cars that, you know, they would use some kind of a drawbar extension or something like that to prevent clipping. So now getting into some more of the details, I was trying to find some animated people is really what I wanted, was more animated people. I only found a couple. So we'll go back as I find things. We're gonna come back and add some more stuff. Animated people, I found some birds here, which are flying around in the foreground there, which ended up being really, really difficult to delete. And I don't remember if I did it on camera or not, but for some reason the hitbox to delete it must be like 1 pixel, because it took me like 20 minutes to actually get it to delete. And again, I'm just trying to place down a lot of cars, parked cars, animated people, not animated people, stuff like that to bring the city to life. And I know you guys are gonna be mad at me for this. There is a lot, I'm not gonna say a lot, but there's gonna be some era mixing here. Like, I know some of these cars are like 1950s cars, and the era that this is supposed to be taking place is like the 1930s. I know, and I apologize. There's only so many assets that are out there, or so many assets that I can find, especially when I'm trying to make a video. So I do the best that I can, and if anything is like really glaringly out of place, let me know, and I'll try to replace it. I'll try to remember to replace it. But keep in mind, I am several episodes ahead. By the time this whole series is completed, or by the time you see the whole series, it'll have been completed for months. So if you leave me a comment for an asset or something like that, I'll get it in there eventually, but it isn't gonna happen, you know, within a couple of episodes that you see. So just bear that in mind. But anyway, like I said, there's gonna be some asset mixing in here. I tried to minimize it as much as possible and just use my sort of artistic license, my artistic eye to just decide what worked and what doesn't work. Back to putting out the catenary here. For the turns, I ended up using these single catenary poles. I don't know if I mentioned this before or not. So I used the double track stuff where I could over the double tracks. And then for some of these bends, I used this sort of single catenary. And then just tried to make them look like they connect. There's a lot of areas where the catenary doesn't connect. I don't want to draw attention to like my mistakes and stuff like that, but I just want to point out that it's not perfect. The catenary is absolutely not perfect. And to even add to that, you'll probably have noticed in the cinematics and in the intro that the pantographs on the engines are not up, and that is because I was not able to get them to work as well. So, and you know, it is what it is, and these are things that you don't figure out until you're halfway through an episode series. Not a big deal. It doesn't bother me. Like I said, I'm doing this as kind of like more of a artistic fun kind of deal. So it is what it is. But yeah, so I'm just going through at this point, just trying to detail this industrial area, which turns out to be probably one of my favorite spots so far that I've done. I've kind of shared a couple screenshots of it, I think, at this point. And you've seen it featured in the very beginning of the intro. So it is a little scene that I really, really enjoy. Just trying to mix it up with different guys on the ground, boxes, and whatever kind of produce and whatever shipments of stuff that they would probably have had at the time. But I didn't want to go overboard because these places weren't like messy. Not like today. There's not garbage on the street. There's not like newspapers all over the place and stuff like that. So they were very busy, very industrial areas, but they were not like a disgusting mess like you'd picture a place like that today. So I didn't want to go too overboard. I did want to kind of keep things a little bit clean. And I think the railroads usually kept their right of way fairly clean because they wanted to have a better image. There was a lot of like, you know, promotional photos and videos, and not videos, but films and stuff like that to promote railroads back then. So they wanted to have a nice image to the public because there were so many railroads back then competing with each other just for the same customers and the same, you know, same areas. You know, you'd have tracks that were run right next to each other, 2 or 3 tracks that are serving the same area, but they were laid by different railroad companies to compete with each other. So it was all about image, who looks good, who's the most functional, I guess, and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's my tangent thing. So let's see, what are we doing here? at this point, I'm trying to add a little bit of scenicking stuff here. This is going into the staging area, which I actually redid some of the trackage for the staging area, so nothing major. This is one of these tricky spots, and there's a few other spots on the map too, where the track goes into staging, but it just goes right into the backdrop. Normally what I would do is put like an overpass or something like that to hide it. But some of these cases where it happens is, I don't know, I'll have to come up with something. Maybe I could put a tree down, or maybe I can squeeze an overpass or something like that in there just to hide it, because seeing the track just go straight in the backdrop is kind of like, kills the illusion, you know? I know we're already looking at a model railroad and the backdrop is like inches away, but when a train is just going right into the backdrop, it definitely kills it. So jumping around, putting a little bit more details here with the trucks. Found some really cool truck assets and tractor trailers and stuff like that, and some of these people too from other maps. I'm not gonna lie, I do sometimes go into other builds and see what kind of assets people use, because that's a really good way to find some stuff. If you don't know what the name of some of these people are, or the asset, you know, going into another build and just kind of looking at what assets they used and making a pick list out of it is a great way to find some new stuff. I mean, half of these people have the people assets have like German names and stuff like that. Stuff I would have never found any of this stuff, you know. So I'm not saying go and steal people's ideas and stuff like that, but it is a good way to kind of get an idea of what's possible out there. And I think we are coming up to the end of the episode here. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in episode number 3.